The other thing that I wanted to address is it seems as though a handful of people really seem for some odd reason to take offense at my attempt to show you how to make salt water. Specifically in regards to two issues. One, the source of the water that I used and how I pre-filtered it. Keep in mind, I'm making 600 gallons every 2 weeks. I do consider myself a hobbyist, but at the same time, I also consider myself in business. I don't really always have the luxury of time to play around with the fancier things. In this particular case, I used a carbon filter to pre-filter the water, removing it of heavy metals, things such as copper, lead, iron, things that would typically get introduced, say, the pipes in your house. There's a woven media to this that would help trap out some sediments. I wouldn't call it purified water. I would call it cleansed, pre-filtered, carbon filtered. What are the alternatives, and why are they necessary or unnecessary? Let's be specific here. I'm referring to the fresh water, which is what you would use to make synthetic sea mix with. The sea mix being a separate component, so essentially there's two ingredients involved in making synthetic seawater: the water, the foundation, the fresh water, and the salt mix itself. There are a few ways of filtering that fresh water. One would be to do nothing. The city feels it's perfectly healthy for you to drink right out of the faucet. You all have access to an ingredients list or a material list or a list results of that water being tested if you want to find out, just simply by contacting your local water company. The other alternatives would be to remove certain things from the water that my carbon filter didn't. And typically, there are three ways of going about that. The first, which none of us would ever really need to consider, would be distillation, which is distilled water. Making it yourself, that's a very expensive, time-involved process. You could probably, through the local bottled water company, purchase distilled water. Number two would be what's referred to as reverse osmosis. I do have a small RO unit here that I make purified replacement or replenishment fresh water with. That unit is a 60-gallon-a-day unit, and that sounds like a lot of water, but 60 gallons a day. There's 24 hours in a day, so essentially that's about 5 gallons an hour. You'll spend all night making 25, 30 gallons, which is okay if you time it out right. As I've referred to in the past, more than once I've overflowed and flooded my garage. The problem with reverse osmosis is most hobbyist units are not necessarily the most efficient, meaning reverse osmosis essentially is forcing water through a very fine filter media, a cellulose filter media that only allows particles of certain sizes to pass through. And what happens with the stuff that doesn't pass through? It gets flushed on by in the form of what we'll call wastewater. Typically, these hobbyist units, for every 1 gallon of purified water they make, they'll flush 1, 2, 3, or 4 down the drain. So I do not consider it to be a very effective, cost-effective, or time-effective way of making water. But if small quantities work for you, that's certainly actually a very good source of foundation fresh water. The third alternative would be what I'll call deionization. Essentially, there's a container that will hold 2 different resin beads. And those resin beads have been washed in certain baths, chemical baths. so that they create a positive and a negatively charged resin bead. And as water passes along, all the components that are the opposite charge of what your little resin bead is will be attracted to it, kind of like when you were a little kid and you ran the magnet through the playground, the sand in the playground, and you got all that little black pig iron on there. That's, in a sense, what these little resin beads do. And over time, they lose their effectiveness and need to be recharged. That's a pretty good way of making purified fresh water. And it's on demand. There really isn't any wastewater. And I actually did inquire at one time about the possibility of using that. But the problem became the commercial aspect of it. And what I mean by that is the local water conditioning company would be more than happy to set me up with a big deionization canister. You've seen them before with all these window washing guys and car detailing guys with that little canister in the back of their pickup truck. But again, the problem became the commercial aspect of it, meaning that water conditioning company wanted to put me on a schedule, which meant that every 4 weeks I would have that canister changed. If I needed it sooner, I'd have to wait to the 4 weeks. If I hadn't used it all up, it would get changed. So it was a convenient means of making purified fresh water, and deionization is a good thing. But economically, it just really didn't work out for me. I'm kind of not real consistent on the amount of water that I go through. Sometimes it's just basic maintenance where I'm taking 10 gallons at a time out to somebody. And then there's other times where I'm taking 100 gallons out to somebody. When I was having my Real Ocean water delivered, I had 3 containers up here, namely just to make sure that I always had enough in my 2-week period between deliveries. I'd rather have excess water than run out of water. Nothing more frustrating than being in business and having the opportunity to provide a service or a business, but for whatever reason, you don't have the supplies to do the business. So those are the ways of making purified fresh water. And it really appears as though some people kind of were irritated with the quick manner of which I made it. Well, sorry about that, but again, I'm at a different level, let's say. I don't have the time to goof around, to fool around. And the reality is that the only reason I even made the videotape, which was more for the mechanics of how to make salt water, was I had just decided to stop using Real Ocean water because I had what I thought were some potential algae problems, and I thought I would give the synthetic sea mix a try. I've been going on about 2 months now of making a synthetic sea mix. Twice I've flooded the garage, and it's a lot more time. Once my saltwater vendor, synthetic salt supplier, maybe it was end of year inventory, but didn't have the inventory of salt on hand, and I ended up having to order it from someone else and having it shipped here, and it cost me like $50 in freight. So unless my Real Ocean water people can't make a delivery, I'll be honest with you, that was a hell of a lot more convenient. Now, the other issue being the tools that you'd use to test the salinity or the density of the salt water. So join us for part 4 as we discuss that as well.